All right. So the recording has started. So hi, everyone. My name is Signe Lynch. I am the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Specialist at the Maine Department of Education, and I serve in the role of State Coordinator of Homeless Education under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And I am joined today by my colleague, Aubrie, and I'm going to have her introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aubrie Howard. I work in the Office of School and Student Supports on the Culture, Climate, and Resilience team of Signe. I'm the Student Success and Wellbeing Specialist, as well as the State Education Agency Foster Care Point of Contact.
Awesome. And so today in the office hours, we're going to just be covering just a little bit of a 101 on McKinney-Vento and foster care provisions within our school systems. And the office hours this year, this is our first time offering the structured office hours that will have some of this professional development built in. So this session will be really about covering some of the basics, and then as we progress throughout the school year, on the first Thursday of each month, we'll have different topics, and we are certainly looking for feedback for specific topics that you're looking for more support and professional development on as well. And it would also be helpful, I think, for the people that are in the Zoom call today, if you don't mind just throwing in the chat what school community, your name and what school community or agency you work for. And if you're serving as the McKinney-Vento liaison, the foster care point of contact, and any other hats you might wear, because that's just helpful for other school staff and community-based organizations to be aware of as well. Thank you. So first, we wanted to cover some of the basics of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So when we talk about McKinney-Vento in our school systems, it's really rooted in federal legislation. And it's the first major federal legislative response to homelessness that reached across the nation. And it was first passed in 1987. There's been multiple amendments along the way. The most recent reauthorization would be part of Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015. And when we speak about McKinney-Vento in school, these protections really apply to all of our public school students, preschool through grade 12, who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And something to note with homelessness in education, there's not federal or state alignment on the definition of homelessness. And when we talk about homelessness in education, we're using the most fully encompassing definition of homelessness. So we're looking at all the different forms of housing instability that a student might find themselves in that could present as a barrier to education. So thinking about identification of students that are experiencing homelessness under education's definition, we think about, can the student go to the same place every night, and is that place safe and sufficient? So if it's missing one of those key elements, we're going to want to ask them follow-up questions to see if they may be eligible for McKinney-Vento and experiencing homelessness under education's definition. One of the key pieces of McKinney-Vento in our school systems is that every local education agency, so what we would refer to as a school administrative unit, SAU in Maine, has a McKinney-Vento liaison designated. And in Maine, many of our McKinney-Vento liaisons are wearing multiple hats in their school community. So there's not a requirement of that McKinney-Vento liaison person needing to be a school social worker or anything along those lines. We have school administrators that are McKinney-Vento liaisons. We have school social workers. We have transportation directors. It can be multiple people, or it could be a diversity of people in that school system that are serving in this role. And really the McKinney-Vento liaison is responsible for identification, but it really takes a lot of support from their school staff as well in making sure that they are identifying, but they are the point of contact for referrals that can come in, and working with the school staff and other community agencies that might be working with students and families that are eligible as McKinney-Vento in a school. And you'll also note, so we have a McKinney-Vento contact lookup that's available on the Maine Department of Education website. And if you go to it, you can select the town that a student is residing in at night, and it will tell you exactly who the liaison is for that school community. You'll also see the charter school liaison. So charter schools receive public dollars, so they do follow McKinney-Vento legislation, just like our public school system. Our charter school liaisons are available on the contact lookup. And then we also have higher education liaisons, and we'll talk about that in another office hours section. And even though those federal protections don't necessarily apply at the higher education institutes, in Maine, we have designated McKinney-Vento liaisons to help with the transition for students that were McKinney-Vento in high school and looking for higher education opportunities. And those liaisons exist at our University of Maine system schools, Maine Maritime, and then the community college system. So considering the students that would be eligible for McKinney-Vento, this could be students that are staying in, for example, a camper or a campground because they lack another place to reside. It could be students that are staying in a hotel or a motel. This is not our students on family vacation. This is because they lack another place to reside. McKinney-Vento could also include students that are couch surfing, which falls into a much larger category that we would call doubled up. And doubled up really refers to students that are sharing housing due to a loss of housing. It could be economic hardship or a similar reason. Any student staying in a shelter or a transitional living program. So for example, some of our students, particularly high school students, may be in a transitional living program that is offered through a homeless provider group. And some of those programs could be a year long, 18 months, 2 years. They would qualify for McKinney-Vento while they're in that transitional living program. Any student staying in a car. And this is a photo from Washington County, and it's really in reference to migrant education students. So students that may be traveling with their families for seasonal or agricultural work. And these students often are qualifying for McKinney-Vento, as well as the Migrant Education Program, another federal program, because the housing that is provided in these seasonal agricultural or fishery work opportunities would not be considered adequate. Substandard housing is another category for McKinney-Vento eligibility. Things to consider about with substandard housing is lack of vital utilities. So has the power been turned off in a home? Pest and vermin, mold that's making children sick in the home. And is it up to building codes, local building codes? So substandard housing. Overcrowding often is falling into that doubled up category. So sharing housing due to a loss of housing or lack of adequate housing. And then running out of heat in the winter. So that's something that we see quite a bit, and that would lead to potential substandard housing identification for a student. Here's the definition laid out as well, and we will be sharing these slides with the folks that registered for this event today. And the most common situation that families do find themselves in and are identified as McKinney-Vento under is doubled up. And that's that sharing housing due to the loss of housing. And we really think about that fixed, regular, and adequate when we're making an identification for McKinney-Vento as a doubled up student. One of the biggest considerations is that family that is sharing that housing have any legal recourse if the person who is the homeowner or the person who's the leaseholder asks them to leave, right? Could they be asked to leave at any point with no legal repercussions? Do they have a legal right to stay there? When we talk about McKinney-Vento, and you'll hear me saying McKinney-Vento, McKinney-Vento, we say this because the word homeless has so much stigma around it. And historically, this has been branded as the homeless program in schools. And so many families do not necessarily self-identify as experiencing homelessness that would qualify under the federal education's definition of experiencing homelessness. And something that we share is just reflecting on our own vulnerabilities of experiencing homelessness. And we're all unfortunately vulnerable to experiences such as the place that you're living in experiencing a home fire or something like that. Natural disaster, things that are outside of our control that can cause someone to lose their housing unexpectedly. And within that, we really think about if you had students in your local school system and you had that unexpected loss of housing, where is that next place that you would go? And if that place is not within the school system that your children are currently attending, say you had to move in with a sibling that lives a few towns away for the time being till you're able to secure your own stable housing or build back, would you want your children to continue to attend the school system that they were in prior to that loss of housing and have that smooth transition and sense of stability while there's all of this insecurity going on outside of the school experience? And Maine is 9th in the nation for rate of homelessness by population. So this is happening in our communities. And when we see this rural, when we look at national research that looks at rural homelessness versus urban homelessness, we see that these rates of homelessness are occurring at similar levels. They just might look a little different, right, in a rural community versus a urban community. But this is happening in our school communities across the state. And when I say McKinney-Vento, we're looking at changing the narrative around this program, that this is a program and federal legislation that exists to serve everyone in a community in a time of need. So providing school stability and resources. And what schools can offer specifically through McKinney-Vento is that students that are identified all receive free meals. They can receive transportation to the school of origin. So that's often what is associated with McKinney-Vento, is that sense of school stability and that transportation to the school of origin, if it's in the best interest of that child to continue to go where they were last regularly attending. We also have immediate enrollment without required documents for students that are McKinney-Vento. So sometimes it's not feasible or it's not in the best interest of a child to go to the school of origin. And so we would get them immediately enrolled and through the doors and connected to those positive adult supports and peer supports. Students can receive school supplies, clothing, hygiene items, access to showers, support with FAFSA, post-secondary. So that's really important for particularly unaccompanied homeless youth, making sure that those students receive independent student status. And we'll talk a little bit about unaccompanied homeless youth, and we'll certainly have office hour sessions focused on unaccompanied homeless youth in the future. And one of the pieces about McKinney-Vento that is in the federal legislation is that it does specifically say that schools can provide other extraordinary or emergency assistance needed. So it does allow some of that flexibility for meeting the unique needs that come up that present as a barrier to education. And once a student is identified as McKinney-Vento eligible, they carry that status for the duration of the school year. So once they're identified, say there is a loss of housing in November and the family is able to secure a lease in May, they would have the opportunity to continue out the school year at the school of origin if it's in their best interest for that school year. They've found stable housing, and then the expectation would be for that following school year that they are enrolling in that new school community where they've secured stable housing or going through the superintendent's agreement route. School of origin and school of residence. So these are when students have a loss of housing that puts them into a new school of residence. That's when our McKinney-Vento liaisons are working together to make what we would call that best interest determination. And it really is a collaborative effort. We default to keeping children in the school of origin because we know that school stability is very important for learning outcomes. But we do, the best interest determination is between the school that they were at before and the school that they are residing in currently. And here's just the statute related to best interest determinations. Funding for McKinney-Vento. So federally, every Title I school has to have a Part A homeless set aside for their McKinney-Vento students. We also have the federal McKinney-Vento sub-grant dollars that go out in a competitive request for application. We're in a 3-year cycle for that, and so we're in year 2, so we would have another RFA coming up. And for state funding, we have the Preventing Student Homelessness Program, which every SAU had received the opportunity to receive some flexible state funding to prevent student homelessness. If your school was receiving Preventing Student Homelessness funds last year, so as that would have been a Grants for Me program for the school folks that are here today, if your school had completed that application and let the Maine Department of Education know you wanted that funding, you would have received a reallocation to carry you through March of this year. And we did see some of the legislature cut some of this funding for continuation. So if you're a McKinney-Vento liaison, you'll certainly be getting more communication from me, and you've already received some communication on that, and certainly happy to answer any questions on that to this group. Quickly, demographic within our McKinney-Vento community is the unaccompanied homeless youth. And those are students that are in a situation that is lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So they are eligible for McKinney-Vento and they are experiencing that nighttime residence without being in the physical custody of their legal guardian. That's how we pick up a student that would be an unaccompanied homeless youth. And there's no lower age limit on unaccompanied homeless youth. We actually have quite a few elementary school students, middle school students that would be considered unaccompanied homeless youth based on family circumstances and things that are occurring. It also includes some of our youth that are older and may have run away from home, maybe having family conflict and are temporarily staying with a friend or a relative for the time being. And it's really based on that nighttime residence, and unaccompanied homeless youth have the right to enroll themselves in school. And we really are focused on providing education for unaccompanied homeless youth and ensuring that there's no barriers to accessing school while they're in a unique housing situation.
Awesome. Signe, there's a question in the chat from Vicky from MSAD 6. We still have Preventing Homelessness funds. How do I know if we are receiving those funds? Our McKinney-Vento liaison has moved to the deans.
So I can follow up with you about what funding is available on Grants for Me, and I'll just make a note of that. And you can always reach out if there's any, like if there's been turnover in your school community and you're just wondering what funding is available. I've been helping a lot of our school communities just determine what dollar amount is available on Grants for Me and what the timeline is for spending it down. And to Chris's question, it does include kindergarten students. And actually, specifically as part of Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015, the most recent reauthorization, preschool was also included. So if your school community has a public pre-K program, those students would also be included. And we do see unaccompanied homeless preschool pre-K students as well. For unaccompanied homeless youth, this is a specific state statute, and this is something our McKinney-Vento liaisons support unaccompanied homeless youth with, is that minors that are identified as an unaccompanied homeless youth by their school system can consent to medical, mental, dental, and other health counseling services if they're in that identified category. And that's something that we have sample forms of for our McKinney-Vento liaisons to support. And I see Erica, your question about pre-K per Title I specifically. Could you just clarify your question?
Yeah, just because pre-K doesn't fall under the federal grade levels that are acknowledged in ESSA. So I just want to make sure, because that sort of guidance about it being applicable for McKinney-Vento doesn't transcend into other areas.
Yeah.
Or does it? And I'd love to know.
Yeah. And so as part of ESSA, they expanded the McKinney-Vento School of Origin definition to include preschool. And within that, you're really using the U.S. Department of Education's data collection for preschool, which would be any preschool program that is administered by a local education agency using their local education agency dollars. And I can send you the Schoolhouse Connection reference for that once Aubrie starts her section on foster care. And just for a quick review of just the data where we are, you'll see that we've seen a really dramatic rise in our McKinney-Vento student counts in our school system. I will say just to this group as well that when we see this dramatic rise, there's a couple of things that are happening. After the 2020-2021 school year, the first year of the pandemic, we saw the American Rescue Plan come in, and we saw very unprecedented funding lines for McKinney-Vento students as part of American Rescue Plan. And so that gave us the ability to conduct outreach and schools to have additional funding to support this student population. So we had new capacity for identification and resource connection, and also absolutely families feeling the pinch of, losses of work opportunities, as well as increased cost of living across the board, which is something that we continue to see today. And then just for an idea of just what residence types doubled up, like I said, is the most common situation that students are being identified under, that sharing housing due to loss of housing. And also just context, so these are our students that are identified as McKinney-Vento, and you'll see that there is this overlap of, we have quite a few students that are also receiving special education services within their school system. Quite a few of this student population that is identified as McKinney-Vento, around 15% would be considered unaccompanied homeless youth. And then we also see multilingual students also being considered a sizable demographic within our McKinney-Vento students. All right, so I want to make sure that if there's any questions specifically about McKinney-Vento, I'm answering those before I pass it over to Aubrie to cover some of the foster care basics.
Can you answer the question about vaccines? I might have missed it because I had to step out for a minute.
Oh, I missed the question on vaccines, but in terms of if McKinney-Vento students
The nurse is not allowing me to have a student start school because they don't have vaccinations. So I know that I can help pay for that, but can I insist on the student attend school? I think I can, but I'm not positive, and I want to keep a relationship with the school nurse at the same time. So.
Absolutely. We want to keep our relationships with all of our school staff supporting this demographic strong. And I will send you the priority notice that speaks to these special demographics as it relates to vaccination. So in the larger context, McKinney-Vento students are required to submit all other school enrollment paperwork, and the McKinney-Vento liaison and school team is supporting and getting all of that required documents. We just get them through the door. So McKinney-Vento students are not exempt from vaccinations, but they can enroll without all of that documentation up front. And I will send you the priority notice that went out related to that.
Okay, so then I can turn around and help them get a vaccination locally since they moved here from away. Okay, all right. Yep. Okay, thank you. That's what I thought, but sometimes I second guess myself.
Understand, and those are confusing. It's confusing, particularly when we have very strong vaccination statute in place.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Aubrie.
Awesome. As I mentioned earlier, I am the state education agency foster care point of contact. So in the next few slides, I'm going to go over students in foster care, supporting their educational stability under Title I, Part A provisions. So why is educational stability important? Research shows that frequent transitions and those educational disruptions have lasting impacts on students' academic, social, emotional, and their college and career readiness. As well, the research shows that when we're able to maximize that educational stability and continuity, we're able to see students have increased attendance. We're able to minimize those education gaps. They're able to build and foster positive adult and peer relationships, and they're able to develop thoughtful plans for life after high school. It also helps families stay connected. Throughout the next few slides, you will see some similarity between McKinney-Vento and foster care. And so in the next slide, I'll go over some acronyms. And oops, not yet, but you'll be seeing those soon. Before that, I just wanted to highlight this updated foster care guidance. So in 2015, there was guidance, non-regulatory guidance released from the Federal Department of Education, as well as the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. That document was about 30 pages. This past November 2024, there was an update to that guidance. It's just under 80 pages. This provides a lot of clarity and information about how we can support students in foster care. It also emphasizes the increased need for collaboration between school agencies, the state, as well as Department of Health and Human Services. This is a free guide that will be on our website soon, and this is something that we can email out with the slides. It's nice to have. I do like Control F. You can go through it and find some information if you need it. The acronyms I was referring to, there are some similarities with McKinney-Vento and some differences. Things that you might already know, just the DOE, Department of Education, DHHS is the Department of Health and Human Services. Within that is the Office of Child and Family Services, and then they have the Child Protective Services, so that's the CPS. You'll see those acronyms a fair amount. Then there's the SAU, the School Administrative Unit. In that non-regulatory guidance, they refer to SAUs as LEAs, so you'll see that language as well. That best interest determination, similar language in McKinney-Vento. And then with McKinney-Vento, there's liaisons, and in foster care, there's point of contact. So you'll have a point of contact at the SAU level, or you'll see the LEA point of contact. The OCFS has 8 districts across the state, and in a few slides, I'll show the district map. Each district has a point of contact. There's that SEA foster care point of contact, which is myself, and then DHHS has a foster care point of contact, which is Jill Hunter, and I have her contact information later on. So when we think about what does foster care mean, what is the definition? Title I defines foster care as that 24-hour substitute care away from a parent or guardian in whom the child welfare agency has placement, so that's DHHS. They have that placement and that care responsibilities. This can look like placements in foster family homes. It could be a formal kinship care, the foster home of a relative, group homes, emergency shelters, residential facilities, child care institutes, and pre-adoptive homes. And then this also includes that trial reunification process with the parents, but DHHS still retains placement and care responsibilities. This includes, when we think about students in foster care, this is all school-age students, and this also includes pre-K as well. So when we're talking about those educational stability provisions. What does that look like for a student in foster care? So in 2015, Congress passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was reauthorized by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And so before that, under the McKinney-Vento Act, you would have seen the language awaiting foster care placement. That was removed at this time because of the understanding that foster care students have unique needs, and these Title I Part A provisions were set to really support that educational stability. And what that looks like in school, they have the right to a best interest determination to determine if they should stay either at their school of origin or that school of residence, regardless of the transportation costs. It also means they have that right to that immediate enrollment without delay of a required documentation. And then it also requires points of contacts and collaboration between them at the school administrative unit, also at the DOE and the OCFS level as well. So collaboration between all the parties. And when a student enters foster care or has a foster care placement change, they have this right to the best interest determination. So I'm just going to go over what that means, and then we'll go over in the next few slides more about the process of a best interest determination. So what that means is that it's a collaborative meeting between individuals who know that student. And that could be from the OCFS team as well as the school team. It could be also after school staff like coaches, support staff, whoever knows that student and can advocate for their best interest. They will be looking in this meeting about the unique needs of that student and understanding what is the best decision for that student. It's also important to note that a student should remain in their school of origin until the bid process has occurred. And similar to McKinney-Vento, the school of origin was the school the student was attending when they were placed in foster care, or if there was a foster care change of placement. And so that means, again, the student should not be enrolled in a different school until that best interest determination has happened, because we really want to be mindful of that educational stability. Does it make sense for them to shift and change? When we're having the bid meetings, the ideal goal is to have them as quickly as possible so that we can not create any educational disruptions. The goal is within 3 business days, or if ahead of time, if there's a placement that is being planned. When we're having the meeting, we want to think about some things, and this is not an extensive list, but some ideas to get the conversation started is thinking about the age and the grade of the student. What is the student's preference? Asking them if it's age appropriate. Do they have an attachment to the school? What does that look like? Who are the relationships they have formed? Where are their siblings placed? Are they in that school? Is that the time where they're able to connect with their siblings? The commute, if a student has a placement over 3 hours away, does it make sense? What does that look like? Time of the academic year, as well as the anticipated length of time. And so these are things that we can be having during the bid meeting, those conversations, and looking at the number of placements, as well as the school climate and the services that the student might be receiving, such as special education and language services. I think there's a question in the chat. So what happens when a student is registered and we find out they are in a foster care placement, so they're now a registered student? Then the next layer is what to do about students who come to us that are in special purpose programs, so there's a layer of special education services. Yeah, so that's a great question. And so I think we're talking about what is the best practice. And I know I've been coordinating with some schools where a student has already registered in the school when a placement has happened. And so when that happens, it's still good to go back to the basics, to have that conversation, to have a bid meeting to make sure you have the information for the student and it makes sense. The special purpose private schools, that is an extra layer. I don't know the date that we're having it, but I think it's later this fall or early winter. We're having Sarah Ferguson, who is part of our work supporting McKinney-Vento and foster care. She brings in the special education lens, but it's still following that best interest determination process. And then the next question from Danielle, can DHHS just enroll a student in a new district without collaborating with the school of origin? Again, the goal is to be having these best interest determination meetings to make sure it makes sense before that enrollment period happens. So really they should be staying in that school of origin, having everyone coming to the table to have that conversation, and then deciding if a movement should happen or not. And part of that is making sure we have the right folks at the table for that best interest determination. That includes the student, if it's age appropriate, parent and guardian that would be deferring to the OCFS or the caseworker or supervisor if they should be at the table, a resource parent, or a surrogate parent, the guardian ad litem, the CPS, caseworker, and supervisor who work in tandem with that OCFS district point of contact, both of the SAU point of contact. So we want folks from both sides. We want folks from the school of origin as well as the school of residence there, so that we have both points of contact. We have some staff from both sides when we think about the counselors, the teachers, and other support staff that could be at the table. We have some resources on our website. There's sample best interest determination forms. This is separate from an IEP meeting. This is held as a standalone meeting to really just determine that best interest. These forms you can adapt and make your own so that it works for your school and your team. But these are some guiding forms that you could also just download and use and follow the process. We have some resources, just a reminder of who should be at the table, what are you considering when you're having a best interest determination, and some guidelines for how you should start. And this is a tricky part of the conversation where transportation costs should not be a factor in determining the best interest. Districts and DHHS must collaborate to ensure students who need transportation to remain in their school of origin can do so. So again, just emphasizing that importance of that collaboration and having everyone at the table. Looks like another question from Pat. So should we not enroll until the meeting takes place moving forward? Once we find out they are a student with a foster care placement. None of this happens in our district this fall, leaving our district with quite a situation of 2 particular students. So yes, the best practice is to have that best interest determination, and the student should remain in their school of origin until that meeting happens. In a few slides, I'll show you where to go to find the point of contact at the SAU level, as well as the district OCFS point of contacts, and kind of the flow of how this should be working. But yes, they should remain in their school of origin until that meeting has happened. Some transportation strategies is thinking about collaboration with the school and the transportation staff to explore possible routes. Can a route be extended? Can a stop be added? What about transfers between elementary, middle, and high school? Is there any possibility to extend that? Collaborating with OCF and DHHS to explore available transportation options. If a student could stay after school, could the foster family pick them up? I know it's rare in Maine, but is there public transportation available? Could a school staff travel with a younger student on public transportation? What about biking and walking? And what are the safety practices that can be implemented to make sure a student can get to school safely? And then Vicki says, in the event transportation is unavailable because of our staffing shortages, what other solutions could we consider to ensure students are able to attend? Yes, it's very tricky across the state with the staffing shortages and the transportation costs. So it's thinking creatively, it's making sure you're having those conversations with your transportation team to do your best to get the student to school. There's also OCFS who at times can support with transportation if a staff is out. They can help coordinate some support in the interim. This is the piece that's similar also to McKinney-Vento as that immediate enrollment. And so students are allowed to immediately enroll with or without documentation. However, that does not mean you will not get that documentation and that they don't need it. It's just not a barrier to that enrollment piece. DHHS will be able to provide some information such as emergency contact, foster care, parent information, where they're located, and making sure you have that CPS caseworker information. And based on our MOU with DHHS, they have the final say in the dispute process. So if there is not an agreement on where a student should attend, DHHS makes the final decision. I also just quickly wanted to go over some of the roles and responsibilities so that LEA, SAU point of contact, they're supporting with that bid process. So that coordination, facilitation, and the documentation. They're supporting that foster care student as they enroll in school, or if they stay in school, just touching base with them. And then developing a process that makes sense for your school district to ensure educational stability. And this is very similar to the OCFS point of contact. They'll be supporting with the bid process. Again, that coordination and that facilitation, following up with the student, making sure they're getting to school, and developing and collaborating on a process to streamline and break down the barriers for that educational stability. Erica has a question. In the event that there is a dispute, is DHHS allowed to move the child based on their bid, which may differ from the districts? I think your question, do you mind stating that question?
Yeah, you spoke to if there is a dispute, but presumably like things are happening before there's like a registered dispute, right? So like I've had this happen. Kiddo lands there, DHHS said so. We have no knowledge of it. There's not a dispute. There's just an action that has been taken by an external agency that we have not been consulted on, or that runs against the consultation we've already, done. Obviously we want to be a welcoming community for a child, all of that stuff, but like who do we reach out to? Because you're saying if there's a dispute, ultimately DHHS trumps us. But like in the meantime, do they get to just place and then we dispute, or do we yeah, I think you understand my question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so while this is happening, the student has maintained at their school, staying at their school of origin during the bid process. The bid process happens, there's a dispute. Then they're moved to the school that DHHS has deemed appropriate. This should be happening in a conversation. It should be happening where all of the parties know what is happening. Who do you contact? You can reach out to myself or to Julie Hunter, who is the DHHS point of contact. And you'll ask in the slide after this, you'll have her contact information. So she supports the DHHS team, similar to how I support the SAU team. Signe, go ahead.
And Erica, I was just going to say, if something like that happens again, you can certainly just, follow up with our team at the DOE, and we can always message them on DHHS on the state system and just try and clarify and bring people together. If there's just, an interaction that you're having with a caseworker and things are just lost in translation, as that student's maybe moving frequently while they're looking for a more stable foster placement. So just feel free to loop us in and we can coordinate and set up a time to meet.
Definitely. And so to find your point of contact, this is neo.maine.gov. This is updated annually. I've heard it should be ready by end of October, early November, which will have the foster care point of contacts. And if you ever have a question on who is a certain point of contact, you can always reach out to me as well. And then the OCFS point of contacts, there are the 8 districts. Currently, District 3 is vacant. That statewide is Julie Hunter. She does go by Jill. She's the DHHS point of contact. She said currently any District 3, Western Maine, direct them to her. So it's first name, middle initial if provided, last name, and then at maine.gov. And this is just a crosswalk of that cross-agency collaboration. The student enters or has a change in foster care placement. OCFS point of contact notifies the SAU, the school of origin point of contact. They then together, those point of contacts, reach out to the school of residence to start that bid process. We're working towards 3 business days. Those point of contacts are inviting team members from both sides to the table. And during that, they're reviewing and considering the best interest of that student, thinking about the student's placement, their age, their grade. And then at the end of that, that should all be documented and recorded, and the bid process will conclude, and then the student should either stay in their school or enroll in their school of residence. And that was a quick overview of Title I, Part A provisions, as well as a quick overview of McKinney-Vento. Some things to keep on your horizon. So We, as Signe mentioned, knew this year we're doing these monthly office hours to really increase resources and awareness and collaboration to the field. The next one will be on Thursday, October 2nd from 3 to 4. We'll hear from the Maine DOE data team on how to record and track both McKinney-Vento and foster care students. Also new this year is we have a monthly joint McKinney-Vento and foster care newsletter. And then we have our websites that have some resources for you all to utilize. And then I think at this time we could, here is our contact. We'll leave this up here for you all to have, and then we could pause the recording if there's any questions or scenarios that folks have.